Good afternoon. Hello? Can you hear me? Yep, okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Eileen Schofield, the president of Historic Somerville, a group of volunteers from across the city who are interested in history and sponsoring events related to Somerville's local history. On a personal note, I'm also a parent of a Somerville High School student. Today, Historic Somerville and the Union Square Somerville playlist are pleased to present a conversation with 2017 Massachusetts History Teacher of the Year, Kevin Dewar. Kevin received this award for his work at the Somerville High School, where he taught for 5 years. Recently, Kevin also received the 2017 Massachusetts Council for the Social Studies San Salvucci Award for Excellence in Promoting Civic Education, as well as the 2017 Kathleen Roberts Creative Leadership Award from the Massachusetts Teachers Association's Human and Civil Rights Award. Kevin teaches at Cambridge Ringe and Latin School, but we are so pleased to have him back in Somerville for his community conversation. Our inspiration for today's event was both to honor Kevin for his award in service to his students, and also to present a discussion that would provide historical context to some of today's public issues. Moderating this afternoon's discussion is longtime Somerville resident, historian, and legal scholar, Dan Breen. Dan has taught at Brandeis University since 1998 in the Legal Studies and American Studies program. He is the recipient of the 2017 Louise Dembitz Brandeis Prize for Excellence in Teaching. Dan will interview Kevin and will also invite questions and comments from you, the audience. We are very grateful to both Kevin and Dan for their time and efforts. I want to thank the Somerville Museum and the City of Somerville Historic Preservation Commission for collaborating with us to produce this event. I also want to thank graphic designer Bill Miller for the event poster. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the work of all the educators at Somerville High School and Cambridge Ringe Latin for their service to our students and our communities. We want to thank Mass Humanities for supporting today's conversation. Mass Humanities works to bring humanity-based programs across the state to enhance and improve civic life. After the event, we will be handing out surveys from Mass Humanities. We would appreciate your feedback. Historic Somerville will also be sponsoring other talks, tours, and events this spring. We invite you to check them out and to consider becoming a member. Beverages are available at the bar for sale, and also there are baked goods at the back of the room for free. Most of all, thank you for coming today. We look forward to hearing from you and hope you will join us after the event for a reception. Now, please help me in welcoming two award-winning history educators, Kevin Dewar and Dan Breen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, it may be that my mic is not on. Can you hear me? Okay. What if I just speak really loud? How about that? No? It may not be on. But that's okay. I think for the time being, I'll just talk really loud. Can people back there hear me if I just do that? Oh, that's not a good sign. You go like, I'll talk louder then. I just wanted to say thank you so much, all of you, for coming out. This is a wonderful crowd. Thank you for your patience, because we're starting a little bit late. And I also want to say what an honor it is for me to be sharing a table here with a Massachusetts History Teacher of the Year from last year. This is a wonderful treat for me. And I'd like to remind everybody that this is Somerville, which means we're all friends here. And what, among other things, that means we're not going to be upset with you if you want to get up and get some baked goods, if there are still some over there, or go up to the bar. And I'll be going up there, too, if things go wrong over the next 45 minutes. So please be our guests and do that. And as we talk, you're welcome to raise your hands, share your thoughts any way you like. We certainly invite audience participation, not just during the question and answer session, if there is one, but even while we're talking. So with all those ground rules straight, is the mic on? Not quite yet? Okay, well, I'm just going to keep going like that for the time being, and we'll see how it goes. So I just had a few questions to begin with, and then we'll probably have a bit of a free-for-all conversation up here. But one thing I was thinking of on the way over here. All right, now I guess it's on? All right, so you can hear me that way? Thank you. Okay. So now that I've made a bunch of ear doctors happy out there, I just wanted to say that as I was walking over here, I was thinking that there are a lot of challenges
in teaching history. It's one of the most rewarding things anybody can do, and I think there might be some history teachers out there who will agree with me, as well as Kevin, sitting right to my left. But there are real challenges to it, and one of the challenges is how do you connect somebody to history, somebody in the present day who is going to be learning something about the 18th or 19th centuries. How do you connect them to that past? It's not that hard if you're teaching physics, because all you have to do is jump up. It's gravity. It applies to you, just like it applies to me. But how do you do that with history? So I thought maybe the first question I would throw to Kevin here is, what are some ways that you've adopted, maybe some strategies that you've adopted to try to connect history to students in a lively and engaging way?
Well, first, let me say good afternoon, everyone. And for former students, they know that I'm very used to energy and enthusiasm as best as possible. And because we're in Somerville and because we are lucky to be here, hopefully we can set that tone. So let's see if we can try this. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, well, let's try to, I know it's raining and everything. Let's try this one more time. Good afternoon, everyone. Cool. I love Forrest's enthusiasm.
Yeah, me too.
So I would say, Dan, thank you so much for, for taking part of the Sunday with me, and hopefully it can be as informative and fun as we planned this out to be over the last several weeks. I think for me, especially in the classroom, something that I've tried my best to promote and emphasize as best as possible is to know that I can learn a lot from my students in regards to just being flexible. And over the years, I think anytime my students have brought up a topic or an issue or a question, I've tried my best to create an environment where we're able to pause and reflect. We're able to connect with the past, trying to see how modern day is presented in a way that may or may not make sense. And whether we have a curriculum that's set for 3 or 4 weeks, I have tried my best to let my students know that history is evolving. History is all around. And it is important as an educator to understand that I'm a learner too. And being able to hear from them, being able to dissect any issue, any subject that's in front of us, it allows a chance to make anything worth diving into. So that opportunity to realize that, yes, you're an open door. Yes, it's an open classroom. I think that's one of many ways we try to bring the world into my classroom.
Mm-hmm. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. Nothing inspires me more every day than people who are in their late teens and early 20s. It's just a marvelous generation that we're raising now, and I think the future is very bright because of them. And I think the thing that I think about when I make a statement like that may be the same thing you're thinking about right now, and that's the events in Florida, where the students at Parkland High School have insisted on taking things into their own hands, matters into their own hands, and actually trying to make change and make history themselves. And I actually have a quote here from one of the students in Florida. His name is Lorenzo Prado, who says, what we must do now is enact change, because that is what we do to things that fail. We enact change. And I think that's somebody who had a pretty good history teacher at some point or other. And speaking of that, I wonder if you comment on how you feel about what the students are doing in Florida, and if you take inspiration from that, and if so, what kind of inspiration?
I would say yes. I think the inspiration that I've taken from the students down in Florida is the same inspiration that I've taken from students here at Somerville, or students that I'm working with over in Cambridge, or just young people in general. I think this idea that, and we were talking about this before the event started, I think this idea that many people are surprised or feel even inspired by these students as if it's a new phenomenon. And I think just picking up a history textbook, you can see that young people have been pushing for change since day one. The fact that we present young people with a history textbook and tell them about Fred Hampton, a young individual in charge of the Black Panther Party, advocating for free and reduced lunch for children in the communities. Little Rock 9, Ruby Bridges, various young people who have promoted this sense of empowerment, this sense of change. Heck, even the fact that young people watch Disney movies, and we have all these superheroes who are doing amazing feats. And when young people then decide to apply it into the real world, there's this sense where people are either hesitant, being like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be doing what we've been teaching you, or this sense of, wow, that's the first time that has ever happened. And I don't know if it's a lack of education on their end or an effort to truly ignore that young people are just as capable of changing anything for the better, just as an adult that's over in Congress. And so this idea that young people are presenting the country with a chance to, I would say, progress. Again, for me, it's nothing new, considering how history has shown that our country has taken its best leads by young people, period.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kevin may be the only one here not to know this, but up in back of me is a picture of the Greensboro Four, who originated, at least in its modern early 60s form, the sit-in movement in the South. And to exemplify what we're talking about in regard to young people, I've got a quote from the guy who I think is second from the left up there, Franklin McCain. And this is what he said when he first sat down at the lunch counter in Greensboro. He said, 15 seconds later, of course he wasn't supposed to be there, but 15 seconds later, I had the most wonderful feeling. I had a feeling of liberation. I had a natural high. I felt like I wouldn't have been cheated out of life had that been the end of my life at that second. I think that's what happens when you do something like that, and it's so encouraging to see what's going on in Florida for that reason. And speaking of inspiration, I was wondering if there's, and I think all of us have these moments, when you've got a certain lesson plan in mind, that you're going to be talking about something that day. What is it that really inspires you? What topic, what person, maybe when you talk about him or her, really puts you at your best? I was wondering if you could think of examples like that in the classroom.
I think that one that crosses my mind, and it's a fresh one. Last year, working with my students, we were talking about the institution of slavery. And we watched the 2016 film, Birth of a Nation. And we also watched, I believe, 12 Years a Slave. And the fascination that my students were able to pick on and wanted to move forward with this idea that the imagery of enslaved humans being mistaken in a careless way. So the fact that Frederick Douglass, for instance, that his likeness were used to be a part of the history of Denmark Vesey, and someone who created slave revolts, along with Nat Turner. And for my students, it was a chance of saying, hey, Mr. Dua, I know we have a test at the end of the week, and we have to move forward, but we have an opportunity to really dive into why such imagery is ignored, why the media is taking factual evidence and not giving it its spotlight. And I think seeing students being able to own their own education, seeing students being able to advocate for something that they know is right, it's such a rewarding thing to witness, and like that should always be praised, regardless of if there are standardized assessments that young people have to do inside a classroom. The sense that students can see what they're being taught and how it could be applied to make improvement in their education, someone else's education, is powerful. And slightly going back to what you were talking about in terms of the Parkland students and their advocacy, it would be wrong for me to not acknowledge that I do have former students in here who currently right now are planning to jump into the activism a few days from now in regards to trying to encourage Congress to work together in regards to gun reform. And whether it's the student in Somerville, the student in Cambridge, students around the country, this sense of nervousness in regards to, can we do this? What's the long end goal? And as an educator, as an adult and as an American, I hope my students, and I hope the people in this room, can try their best in one way, shape, or form, support them in every way possible. And I say that because history has shown that when young people do work with old people, no offense to the age group here, but when young people do work with old people, great results happen. And so for the students who are hoping their best to feel safe, not only in their schools, but in their communities, I think as adults, we owe it to them to listen, to support, to empower them as much as possible so that they and us can feel as comfortable in general. And again, that's not a new thing that's going on in Florida or here in Somerville. That has been one of the blueprints for our country.
And speaking of blueprints for the country, and speaking of young and old bonded together in common initiatives, there's the Boston Tea Party up there. People of all ages throwing the tea off into Boston Harbor. 341 chests of tea. That was a major action. And it brings up something that we often talk about. Why is it that episodes of dissent and episodes of sometimes, if not murderous protests, at least protests that violates the rules and being that those in power have set, we commemorate them now and we celebrate them now. But when they happen in the present day, it seems as if we're suspicious of them, and sometimes we're perhaps encouraged to lash out against it, and sometimes change the subject because we don't really want to talk about what the protesters are actually saying. And I guess that brings up the question about what history teachers can do in the present day. What do you think is the function of a history teacher besides perhaps preparing students to pass the test that eventually they'll have to pass at the end of the year? And here I was thinking about what the Oxford Dictionary said was the most common or most important new word from 2016, which was, I believe, let's see, I think I've got it written down here, post-truth. So that's the word, post-truth. So if we live in a post-truth world, or if that's the danger of the world we're living in, what can teachers in general do to combat that? Because that strikes me as a pretty dangerous phenomenon.
I would say as best as possible, don't play ignorance to history. Try to reflect in regards to what is your role in combating against institutions that have undermined or suppressed such narratives that has been helpful to our country. For instance, raise your hand in this lovely space of ours. Raise your hand if, every 4th of July, you, in some way, shape, or form, celebrate our Independence Day. And that could be getting a tan, that can be going to the pool, barbecues, fireworks. Awesome. And raise your hand, and by all means, you can speak as honestly as you choose to. Raise your hand if you had an issue with the NFL protesting by quarterback Colin Kaepernick when he refused to stand up for the national anthem. Raise your hand if you had just an issue, whether it made you feel uncomfortable, whether you thought, yeah, he should stand up for 2 minutes. Is there anyone in the room who may have felt that? Cool. A few individuals. Trust me, you are among many in this country who felt the same way. And the reason why I use those two arguments is because, again, our country, whether people want to admit it or not, was founded on violent actions. We're founded on civil disobedience. We celebrate that act every 4th of July. And yet for individuals who may have a problem with someone exercising civil disobedience for 2 minutes that had no disruption to an actual activity, which we can all admit is essentially violent in many ways, and this individual advocating the chance for a country to pause and think, how can we improve safety so that police brutality does not happen, so that individuals who are black and brown, or just individuals in general, don't have to lose their life in regards to implicit bias and racism, discrimination. And then when you put those into context, it says a lot about how our country is still struggling with calling out racism. Our country is still struggling with calling out power. Our country is still struggling with calling out how we should hold ourselves accountable. And I say as an educator, it's our responsibility to be as honest as possible, not just with young people, but with adults too. Because when you don't do that, then it really does play up the stereotype or play up the stigma that is put on America as to we have no problem handpicking certain parts of our history that makes us look good, but we are hesitant to truly realize that the sins that we committed it still exists. And so, again, as a history educator, it's important that we are honest, that we don't hold back, that we do feel uncomfortable, because without doing so, then we do repeat over and over and over ways that undermine society. And a great example would be if you look at such past leaders as, let's say, Muhammad Ali, or those individuals who protest like the Vietnam War. Or even Carlos and Smith protesting at the 1968 Olympics. These individuals were either fined, they were suspended, even many players in the WNBA were fined $500 each, and their teams were fined over $50,000 because they wore shirts in terms of protest. And so when these moments happen in present day where we criticize individuals for essentially using the same blueprint that we celebrate, and then decades later we look back and we do the same thing. We say, oh wow, yeah, that was actually a good idea. Like, oh wow, that actually made sense. It would be great as a country, and maybe this has to start in the classroom. It would be great when we don't have to wait decades from that moment to appreciate the activism that does more good than harm in our country.
Yeah, very good. Definitely applaud for that. Since you brought up Muhammad Ali, I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes it takes people like Smith and Carlos up there to remind me of what we are at our best, a country that tolerates and should encourage dissent. And I've got a quote here from Muhammad Ali that I think expresses some of that sentiment. And this is what he said at the time that he was in trouble for not reporting to the draft. He said, "I am America. I am the part you won't recognize, but get used to me. Black, confident, my goals, my own. I am America." And as far as Smith and Carlos go, up there, some of you may remember this, when they made their famous Black Power salute after winning the gold and the bronze medal at the Mexico City Olympics. This is what Brent Musburger said, who is still a commentator on TV, I think. He said, "One gets a little tired of having the United States run down by athletes who are enjoying themselves at the expense of their country." And he called them black-skinned stormtroopers at the time. And I was wondering if that rings any bells, maybe to Kevin or maybe in the audience, in regard to Colin Kaepernick and some of those who decided to kneel during the national anthem. Here are some comments that were said about them. For the kind of salary they make, they should be grateful for what they have. They shouldn't show disrespect for the country. And because part of what we do as historians is try to put current events in context, I was wondering if maybe you or anybody in the audience would like to speak to the context of that, the idea that somebody like Colin Kaepernick or anybody else should simply be grateful for what they have and not try to engage in protest, even though they may perceive injustice going on. Go ahead.
When you have a platform like that, you know a lot of people looking at you. It makes it very
They don't use it very often, do they? I think you're right. Yes?
I reply to, wherever that guy says it's weird, 50 years ago, I'm saying that's what they were doing back to the country.
Well, that's certainly the way I would interpret it. And in fact, on Tuesday, I'm going to be teaching the famous flag burning case, Texas versus Johnson, Supreme Court opinion, where Justice Brennan's main argument was that if you burn the flag, in a very important way, you're demonstrating activism based upon the ideals the country was based in. You're actually paying homage to the people who threw the tea in the harbor.
Hearing from other athletes lately, like LeBron James, who are supporting that concept.
And I would, something I was fortunate when I taught over at Somerville, and being able to be a part of a department, and one of my former colleagues and one of my good friends is here as well. Something that I was fortunate is being a part of a department who truly emphasized as best as possible with the students in our curriculum how we can incorporate as much narratives as possible for the students. And that could be in forms of projects, it could be the form of like films, discussions, and this idea that because we were a diverse department, we truly realized that our role as educators was to help the young people, the diverse demographic that we had in our classroom, to help them critically analyze, validate those different stories that are often left out. And I say all that because for me as an educator, I was able to truly come into my own skin to try to appreciate the role that I had, especially given my race. And whether it's as an educator or, use an example from Muhammad Ali, this idea in our country where maybe one too many times often, marginalized groups, individuals who are part of these groups usually have that burden of always having to teach and reteach America what they should have been doing since day one. And that is a hard truth that in our country we try to stray away from. Why certain individuals, if it's someone who's a woman, someone who's Asian, someone who's black, someone who's gay, this idea that the country tends over and over and over to look for them to be that conscious, that moral compass, to hold that mirror in front of everyone and say, hey, maybe there's something wrong with the mainstream. Maybe there's something wrong with the majority. Maybe there's something wrong with how things have been taught. And not being able to truly critically analyze our roles, a missed opportunity takes place. Great example, today's February 25th. 3 more days before Black History Month is finished in our country. And as diverse as Somerville is, as prideful as it is in terms of the knowledge and everything, you can even look around this room. And unless, I'm not going to assume because you truly don't know someone's background just by appearance, but if I was going on appearance alone, technically I am the only African American, only black person in this room. Now, what does that say? I don't know. There's many things that people can say about that. My spin on it is that the fact that even for me, having even the ounce of thinking that it is my responsibility to relay information that should be instilled in elementary school in regards to history. It says a lot about how, as individuals part of a marginalized group, we do have that burden in trying to educate. Because when we try to do that, for many individuals, it's because as a country, we struggle to do that, to make it easier. The fact that wearing a T-shirt or starting a hashtag or organizing a walkout or talking about different issues that do affect us as a country from our past or our present or our future, oftentimes individuals, part of marginalized groups, feel that they have to continue to do so because over 200 plus years, our country is still repeating the mistakes that the majority has done, repeating mistakes that institutions. And I say all that because, again, as educators or probably as Americans, we really have to get off that first and second chapters in history books and actually realize that everyone should be looking forward as opposed to hoping that, a Muhammad Ali or LeBron James are the ones who have to make us think.
Mm-hmm. And good, very good. And sometimes when you do stand up for yourself and you stand up for justice, they actually end up making statues of you. There's Smith and Carlos up there at San Jose State. And I think we have a potential question over here before we go any further.
Hi. This is a question for my teacher. It's sort of two-pronged. I'm wondering what it is that you assign students to. I assume you teach American history?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
What you assign them to read, and whether at that level, high school level, you and your colleagues engage the students on questions of broader philosophical import, like what's the meaning of history? What are the theories of history? Do you believe in progress? Do you believe in a cyclical theory of change? Where do you think we are now, given your views of history? Do you get any of that in any way to advance for students at that age? But I was just wondering,
Thank you for the question. I don't think I would ever, because I know my students and I know they would call me out. I don't think I would ever say that anything has been, anything that I presented to them has been over their heads. I think the students that I've had, regardless of what academic level that I taught, they were always willing, whether they taught me something new, but they were always willing to engage. They're always willing to dive further than what the textbook. And over the years, even for myself, just in regards to how I wanted to implement that critical lens, in my classroom, my students use, whether it was the actual assigned textbooks here and there, or drawing from different sources, whether it would be, let's say, CNN or Fox News, as trying to find different types of perspective to apply. Documents centered from abolitionists, documents centered on former slave owners. So this idea of using as much resources as possible, understanding that we do have 10 months to try to fit in everything as best as possible. But yeah, always encouraging that the best way to understand history is that it is truly dependent on whose point of view, like who's telling the story. Because as great as it is for me to talk about the founding fathers creating laws that would help our country, there are also different demographics in our country at the time who may have seen things a lot different, whether they were women, enslaved humans, Native Americans. So this idea of, as a history teacher, whether you're teaching American or world, knowing that with the time frame that you have, try to squeeze in as much different point of views as possible. And understand that if history can be learned, that it's all connected, that we can learn a different perspective. It goes along the lines of saying that that there is no one single story. And I think that's very important, whether you live in a quote-unquote liberal state as Massachusetts or down in Alabama, this idea that history is not assigned to just one storyteller.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things earlier that I'd like to get back to just for a second. You said that it's a shame that we always have to learn the same lessons and that it's often marginalized peoples who have to teach us those lessons. I think that's an important point. And I'd like to connect that a little bit to the point over here where we have some theories of history that are cyclical in nature, that things just go round and round, and some of the same situations are faced and often the same responses, sometimes fortunately, sometimes not so fortunately, are levied against them. And one thing that brings up is the maybe necessity of trying to put current controversies in context and to show that the same kinds of rhetoric, the same kinds of discourses came up in past controversies that are now being leveled against sometimes protesters and present-day controversies. And that brings up, I think, to me, the idea of immigration and how controversial that has been, because you also mentioned the diversity that we love to see in our classrooms. And Somerville actually is a pretty diverse place, more than our fair share of people born abroad, which is one of the wonderful things about living here. But I just wanted to ask a couple of questions maybe about the immigration controversy. First of all, does anybody know who that guy is? Yeah, that's Sam Ervin. And just wanted to ask Kevin, to what extent you really try to show how rhetoric these days in a controversy like immigration was reflected in rhetoric over similar controversies 60, 70 years ago, or even before that. So the reason I got Sam Ervin up there is that back in 1965, when they were considering the Immigration Act, which now may be radically amended, although we don't know if that's going to happen yet, he didn't like the idea that we were now going to open up our borders to people not just from Western Europe, but more from Latin America, Africa, and Asia. So one of the things he said was that under this bill, Sam Ervin said from North Carolina, the people of Ethiopia have the same right to come to this country as the people of England. That's a bad thing. People of Ethiopia have the same right to come to this country as the people of England. I don't know of any contributions the people of Ethiopia have made to America. He said that in 1965. And I'm happy to say now there are about 251,000 people of Ethiopian descent in the United States who have made contributions every single day. But I just bring that up to show how the same kind of rhetoric we deal with now happened before. And in a way that can be very discouraging. Do we ever really learn our lesson about that, for example, the strength of diversity? But I wonder what value you put in trying to remind students in a class that what they hear around them is actually reflected in controversies 60, 70 years ago, and if that's a way to bring history alive to you.
I think this may actually feel as a history lesson that I'm about to say, but
It's okay.
I just wanted to list for individuals America's love of immigration policies. 1790, the Nationalization Act for just free whites. In the 1800s, the Indian Removal Act. 1868, with the 14th Amendment in terms of citizenship. It was actually black men, it applied to black men, but not Asians. The 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act. The 1882 Immigration Act was centered on trying to prevent individuals who, in our country, we consider as lunatics from coming in. 1921, the Emergency Quota Act. 1924, the Immigration Act that actually had a ban on Arabs, Jews, Africans, and Asian. 1980, the Refugee Act. And in current day, whether you want to call it the travel ban, as a nice way to not say the Muslim ban. The issue was DACA, that's going to expire very shortly. This idea of chain migration, extreme vetting. Teaching students, and I know I've said this over the last several minutes, teaching students and adults, but teaching them about who we are as Americans. Pardon me, like I'm thinking of just how frustrating it is. but teaching them about how, in our immigration policies, if you think about just the few examples that I gave you, it is rooted on the sense that whether it's white supremacy or ableism, that our country is fascinated on making sure that people who come into our country have to contribute in a way that, helps our country grow. And I say that because I would say a few weeks ago, our current president, President Trump, mentioned how he would love, individuals who do come to our country the legal way to, be like intelligent, like being able to contribute in a way that's helpful. And for us, we have a history in our country where we perceive that someone's mental or physical or racial composition essentially had to be put into one or two categories. An individual that is valuable or an individual that is invaluable. And when you put it into those two categories, it says that as a country, we require immigrants, we require humans to almost beg for this presupposed ability to be a part of a community. This idea that if you don't have this certain IQ, there's no way you can be a part of our community. If you don't have this certain skin tone, there's no way you could be a part of who we are. In the sense of trying to preserve an individual for being inferior, an individual for being a threat, it's not new. Again, the first item that I mentioned was from 1790. And when you put it into that context for students and adults, it begs the question, why do we continue to do this? Why do we have an obsession with trying to make sure that our community cannot function if it looks slightly different than it was centuries ago? There was even an article that was published but then taken down. I believe he was the vice president and editor on Fox News, by criticizing the demographic for our Olympic team, and describing them as, America may be sacrificing its athletes, like its team, to become darker and grayer and gayer. Obviously, that was taken down rightfully so. But the sense that, again, the demographics in our country have to look a certain way to be beneficial, as opposed to if someone wants to be a part of our community, they can. It strays away from that history in our country where we care so much about how someone looks like. We care so much if someone is smart, if someone can walk on two legs. And just that obsession dehumanizes an individual from being a part of it. So being able to show real documents to our students, not just in high school, but whether it's in elementary, middle school, college, adults who hear this information, being able to talk with their children, talk with their peers, at a bar, in their living room, which would make an interesting conversation in a bar. But being able to pass along this information, it's not fake news. It's not trying to push a liberal agenda. These are historical facts. Why are we repeating ourselves?
Yeah, why do we repeat ourselves? That's a really good question. Speaking of repeating ourselves, this is one of the chants that was said by the white supremacists in Charlottesville over the summer. You will not replace us. You will not replace us. Now that has a very bad and unfortunate history. And here's another quote, not fake news, he actually said it, somebody that we celebrate this month, George Washington, who said the United States should be open to the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions. So he didn't draw those invidious distinctions you were talking about. What better way to teach George Washington than to bring up something like that, it seems to me. And I can't resist adding, since I teach at Brandeis, so much of what we have to worry about now is the kind of sentiment and maybe the kind of proposed legislation that happens out of fear. Somebody's afraid, so they propose laws out of fear. It's never a good way to act if you're afraid. And this is what Justice Brandeis said about that. Those who won our independence believed that the final end of the state was to make men free to develop their faculties. They believed liberty to be the secret of happiness and courage to be the secret of liberty. They were not cowards. Men feared witches and burnt women. You never act out of fear. And the great thing about young people is they don't have those built-up fears a lot of the time. It's so rewarding to be around them because of that. And I think that we'll probably have to open things up for questions in a moment, but I thought that maybe on a positive note, we could talk a bit about social media, and although we worry about that a great deal as educators, maybe there are some good points about it too. And I want to maybe put Lucy Stone up here for a second. It's always a good idea to put her up. So when Lucy Stone was advocating for women's rights in the 19th century, she always had a great deal of trouble, as a lot of people did, getting the word out. How would you actually get the word out if you were Lucy Stone? So she gave lectures all over the place and hoped that hundreds of people would come to see her. She founded her own magazine, the Women's Journal, and that meant she could print editorials and hope that people bought the magazine. But it was always very difficult to get your point of view across unless you had a newspaper of mass circulation. But what's different about today in the Me Too movement? How long did it take to get that point of view across? And maybe there's something hopeful about that. Have you thought much about, in your classes, how to talk about mobilization online or the internet and maybe some of the positive things about something that we are kind of afraid of these days, and that's social media?
I would say in regards to using social media, understanding how powerful in a positive or even in a negative way it can be, I think not shying away from that tool is important to implement. I think someone as Lucy Stone advocating for what she believed in during her time period, it harpens on the idea that, especially in this country, marginalized groups would use as many resources as possible to educate the masses. And when you were talking about the Me Too movement and the rise of it, originally, 10 years ago, it was actually founded by an African-American woman who did not get the spotlight that she should have gotten when it happened. Again, goes along with what I said in regards to different resources and how we respond to who's able to advocate with certain resources. But I guess, and I know you mentioned it before with the Confederates, the Confederate statues, and this may be a leap how I'm going to connect it, because I know we're going to open up for questions shortly, but put it in this regards. So maybe over the last year or so, the Me Too movement has, as many people like to describe, has swept our nation in regards to holding individuals accountable for sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment. And individuals are speaking on how to have their voices validated. And social media with that, hashtag had played a huge role. And what's fascinating is that as much coverage that the Me Too movement has had, and many individuals saying, time is up, it's great that our country is moving towards this, the fact that we still, whether it's on our currency, statues, street names, that we have places in our country named after amazing leaders who wrote laws, who led our country, amazing leaders who were rapists in regards to being slave owners. The fact that we still preserve them, that we hesitate when we say, wait a minute, Thomas Jefferson, yes, he was a product of his environment and so forth. His statue should not come down, or, his face should not be changed. Just the fact that we still have them celebrated every single day undermines a social media Me Too movement, without question. And many people would say, it's a part of our country, it's a part of our history, we can't rewrite that. But even that hesitation of our country to pause and think, the institutions that we set up here that have had a huge role in undermining people's value, whether it's through policies or even by deaths. Institutions that across the ocean in Germany, they made sure to make sure that what took place in the 1930s and 40s would never be celebrated. The fact that our young country struggles with even having a debate, not just with a Confederate statue in Virginia, an organization that in their constitution, when they were ready to go against the Union, made sure that if they were to win, that future territories could still have slavery. The fact that we struggle with that history acknowledgement, the fact that we struggle with talking about, yes, George Washington talked about we shouldn't have political parties. George Washington also was a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson played a huge role in the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, by many accounts from historical documents, not had a mistress, as people would like to say, but raped Sally Hemings. The fact that we have all of this, and you can look in the history textbooks, you can go to a museum, these aren't lies, that we have them. We celebrate the Me Too movement, but we stop short every single time, whether it's a social media discussion, whether we are in a classroom, whether you're talking with friends, we stop short in thinking, why not truly go all the way and truly support these marginalized groups who are speaking on behalf of human rights? Why do we stop as a country? As young as we are, why do we always stop? And I think in that regards, something that I value the 5 years that I was at Somerville, that I value over the last few months was my students over in Cambridge. My students, regardless of their background, regardless of what they look like, they were always able to have those conversations and come to an agreement that common sense and human rights may send us at the end of the day. That regardless of, again, their family background, their household, they were all able to have that discussion, to turn in homework assignments that were annoying, but they understood that what they were learning was important. And as much as I value what they do, as much as I value the educators that I have been fortunate enough in working with, or even the friends that I've had, that I've learned, I would say something that's troubling as an educator, someone who loves history, is how do you expand that so not one classroom or not a hallway full of classrooms or not one school can have that same mindset? And it could be, again, a conversation that needs to be pushed in our, for our lawmakers, conversations that need to be pushed through social media. But the sense that we have all the tools and resources in our country to actually be on the same page. We have all the resources in our country to actually communicate, to critically analyze our history that's right in front of us. What's our hesitation in trying to do so? And me saying white supremacy, me saying sexism, me saying classism, me saying all of this that's true, if I was a betting person, at least one person in this room would disagree with me. Many people across the country will probably disagree with me. And even if I were to present historical documents, even if I were to present footage, even if I were to present evidence that we tell our students every single day, hey, you're gonna look through this. Here's a highlighter. Annotate this. Come back, get ready to have a quiz. You're gonna do a project. That we tell our students to do so, why can't we as adults or as Americans do the same thing? And I think, again, whether it's social media or textbook, we do owe it to ourselves to not just let history and being able to progress with history be contained within a classroom.
Well, on that spirit, are there any questions for Kevin or me, or maybe somebody who's not here if you want to phone in? Yes. How about over there? Yes. Yes. Do you want to walk up to the microphone? Or you can maybe line up for people with questions. That might be good.
Hi.
Hi.
One thing that's been troubling me recently, well, among many things, is the weaponizing of information. And I'm sort of wondering in the historical context what you think of it. There's sort of two ways where one is this, I don't know, say calling slaves immigrants or workers in textbooks. So that's one side of it. And the other is, telling people that Colin Kaepernick is kneeling because he hates America or he hates the flag, rather than the actual reason he's told people he's. So you kind of get, I don't know if there's a historical context for that, or.
The short answer would be racism. The short answer would be white supremacy. The short answer, I've had this conversation with people where they approached me and said, I don't understand why, let's say that man is kneeling, for instance. And I would show an interview of him maybe a few days after he kneeled. And he looked in the camera and said, oh, this is why I'm doing it. And a year after that date, people are still asking, what's his motive? And for some individuals, they choose to see what they want to see. For teachers, we teach what we want to teach. For statewide curriculums, we advertise what we want to advertise. Why? Because for many individuals, the truth hurts. For many individuals, it's very uncomfortable. And you can try your best to prevent facts as they are. You can try your best to provide as much context as possible. But it says a lot about how certain communities, certain individuals, we do nurture certain environments that puts people in a bubble. And this is not a conservative attack. This is not a liberal attack. This is, that has been my viewpoint over the last several years in terms of humans and how we want to perceive the world around us. So yeah, at the end of the day, I think something that I value as a history educator is that we have resources that we can rely on to, in a way, back up what we're trying to say. And then it is the hope that people can take different sides and take different perspectives and find some underlying truth that connects everything.
Yeah, and I think in that respect, being a historian has become almost a sacred calling. You rely on the evidence. You insist upon pointing to the evidence at all times. Yes.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm white. I am listening to what you're saying. As you can maybe surmise from looking at me. Hear what you're saying. I think it's really important and great, and I'm learning a lot from you, so thank you. And you've given me a lot to think about. It's it is uncomfortable, but it's the right level of discomfort, so thanks for that. I know that the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is undergoing a revision of the social studies frameworks, the curriculum frameworks, and it's currently in the public comment phase that will be ending probably early April sometime. And I'm curious if you've maybe looked at that, or if you have any plans to, or if that's an area that you think is worth diving into a little further, and if so, maybe what might you need from us who are hearing you? Thanks.
Thank you. I currently am looking at that. A few individuals that I work with have brought that to my attention to see my thoughts. And something that's important in regards to understanding curriculum, especially in our state, is if it's going to go through certain changes, making sure that the people who are proposing, who are dissecting it, it's in front of a diverse pool. Because without doing that, it already limits the education that could be presented in front of a student. So making sure, and you can nitpick it and have quotas, but if the individuals who are about to make the decision in regards to how social studies should be taught, if they all look the same, then that's a disservice right there. So anyone who is actively heading that review, essentially the burden is on them to seek out educators with different perspectives, whether it's their mindset or even skin color. That's a huge responsibility. It may be challenging, but it's not impossible. And so if educators, or if the review in terms of the frameworks is centered on certain communities and not everyone, then by all means, I have every right to say, why even reform the curriculum in the first place? So don't limit analysis and reforming just with certain individuals who you can conveniently talk to. I understand that the privilege I have is a History Teacher of the Year title. I understand that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that what I can bring to the table is any better than a colleague who is next to me, who may have been teaching more years than me, or it may have been their first year. Again, that requires those heading that revision to seek out those different teachers. So the role you can do is, see the review board, see who's looking at this, and if people look the same, challenging those to branch out.
Hi, thanks for coming here. People are not all good, they're not all bad. We like to find heroes and people that we point to as enemies, good guys, bad guys. Laws aren't all good and aren't all bad. They have people that they benefit, and they have consequences, bad consequences for other people. And when we look at our politicians, they all have imperfections as well, and sometimes we focus on the things that we like about them, and sometimes we focus on the things we don't like. How do you, but because of that complexity, we have a hard time dealing with that and talking about that, and I think you've mentioned some of that. So how do you work with your students in helping them to weigh those complexities and not get caught up in things not being perfect, or people not being perfect, or not being heroes, or not being the side they want to be on when there are ambiguities and things aren't black and white?
Thank you. Acknowledging that people are human, that we all make, people do good or bad things and all that. That is common knowledge or common sense. In regards to humans being complex, I think the way I try to present it is how we define what it means to be complex, and how we understand why someone is complex, why someone's imperfections should be scrutinized or excused depending on the mindset. And I say that because you brought up the example of, politicians make mistakes and all of that jazz. A common argument that you hear from people is, let's say, George Washington, for instance, since his name brought up, he was a product of his time. That even, while he was nearing his death, that he, freed the enslaved humans, that he was a complicated human being, led our country, owned enslaved humans, and so forth. And we should understand that. And the argument that my students have analyzed and they understood is that not every human being that lived in our country at that time thought the same way as George Washington. Not every single human being enslaved another human being. There were abolitionists who were against the dehumanization of human beings at that same time where those complicated leaders were running the country and owning slaves. So in that regard, why is one person complicated that we hold that title to in regards to someone being an upstanding citizen, but also being okay of selling human bodies? And there's another individual who may look like him, just as white, just as old, and believe that slavery was wrong. Why? So again, understanding how we analyze what it means to be complicated, and then also challenging our students and ourselves, do we use that as an excuse in regards to what many people were able to know what was right and wrong since day one? And again, putting that challenge while using resources to back up that information, it does make for a colorful conversation, whether it's challenging or not, but a much needed conversation in general.
Yeah, and I think having a conversation is absolutely crucial, so I'm glad you put it that way. So I got John Quincy Adams up here, and one thing I try to do with John Quincy Adams, just as an example, is I'll go through all the things I would like students to remember about him. And among those things is that he didn't stand up for the Creek Indians when he could have, when he was president in the early 1830s. Mid to late 1820s. So I'll talk about that. He's a man with an awful lot of warts, but I'll often say, here's what I really want you to maybe think about him in terms of emulation. What can you take away about him in your own life? And that was that he stood up for principle when he supported the embargo of 1807 when almost everybody else in Boston was against it. He knew he was going to lose re-election, but he did it anyway. So that's not a bad thing to remember and internalize while you're remembering everything else about him that's not so good.
Hello. It's an eventful time we're living in, and sometimes my friends and family like to say, we ask each other, in 50 years or 100 years, what are they going to say about us? And I'm wondering if you think in the classroom like an imagined future, or that kind of a question where like a future lens is being put on the present and the past, if that's a way possibly to overcome like the blind spots and hypocrisies of the history that we've obviously not been taken account of, or if that's just be like a flight of fancy.
It's a great teaching tool. Mm-hmm. It's a great idea.
I would say, 40, 50 years from now, we're going to look back at this current or at this climate, and I think it will be a combination of laughter. I think it'll be people shaking their heads. I think one of the sentiments that I worry about would be individuals looking back and being asked, wow, what happened in 2015, 2016, 2017, like what was going on? And one of my students, old and gray, just looking at that young person and saying, yeah, that's America. That's the history textbooks that you're learning right now, yeah, it wasn't any different. Like that's what I experienced as well. So being able to say, yes, I lived that would be great in terms of providing someone with context. But for anyone right now to not be able to have the hope that they can say that there were progress, that would be disheartening, because I would say that as educators or as adults, we didn't do our role in trying to make that conversation better in the future.
Okay.
Sorry, my question just builds off that.
Okay.
So reckoning with a lot of these narratives, things like 12 years a slave, and looking at these like repetitive patterns of oppression, how do you avoid despair, and how do you try to encourage that in your students, especially your students of color, especially your students from marginalized groups? Because it can be so overwhelming.
I mean, I don't avoid it. And I say that because I've taken, and you know, someone who I hold dear to my heart, former colleague and you know, good friend, Ada, like she'll tell you, like I've taken days off from work because it has been too much. Like, and I think in my teaching I've become, some people will criticize, like in terms of how I'm honest, yeah, just trying to balance that is not an easy task. And sure, it's easy for me to say, oh, because I'm black, you know, it's hard. I would like to say, yeah, that's true. And I'm also, you know, a human being. And, you know, I felt that way when something horrific or unfortunate has happened, not just within the black community, but just communities that has been affected by X, Y, and Z. And so, yeah, I embrace the real sentiments that have affected my life. I have tried my best to listen to my students when they express how life is hard. I try my best to balance it all, and I try to, maybe it's because I'm a history teacher and I love that hope. I always try to put into this context as to, you know, things have changed. You may never see it within your lifetime, but things have changed. And so I try my best to hold on to that. But yeah, I would never tell a student who's experiencing, you know, how current events has affected them. I would never tell my students to, you know, check that at the door, because that's not education. That's just saying, I want you to be a robot and I want you to feel the way you should feel to pass this test.
Okay.
So you mentioned the U.S. as a young country a lot, and something I think about is almost that the U.S. is kind of like a teenager, certainly in comparison to other countries in the world, but definitely the Western powers, in that not only are we young, but that the nation as a whole has not experienced mass tragedy. It's only been to marginalized groups. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that sort of youthful lens or lens of inexperience as a country and as a national unit has affects the way that you teach or affects the interpretation of history.
I actually have used that example that the United States is like a teenager. And I would say, yeah, it plays a role in my classroom, but I also make sure not to make it an excuse for the United States. And I say that because, yeah, it's great to describe our young country as a teenager that may act reckless, but not every teenager ever acts reckless. There are civilizations that have not done half the things that we have done in our country. So what makes us different, whether you want to say that as a positive or negative. So yeah, I emphasize how our country is still evolving, but I also try to help my students understand that the mistakes that we have made does say a lot about who we are and what we choose to pursue and what we choose to pursue and not pursue. So yeah, it's as best as possible putting everything through a critical lens. And by doing so, it does not mean that you want that you hate America. Just means that you want to improve your home.
And unfortunately, we seem to be out of time, but maybe this would be a good time as we conclude to bring up Diane Nash, who I had up there a little earlier, didn't get a chance to talk about. But we were talking about how to avoid despair, the energy of young people and how inspiring they are, the honesty of young people. And one thing I try to think about when I feel like I'm delving into despair is that Diane Nash was given a jail sentence in Mississippi. She could have paid a fine, but she decided not to. She decided to accept the jail sentence, even though she was pregnant at the time, and even though that meant she was probably going to have to give birth in a jail in Mississippi. But she decided to go because she felt that was necessary to make sure that her child would grow up in a country that was a little bit better than it was in 1962. And if she didn't despair, then neither should we.
I'm going to add on to that, and I've rarely been able to use the privilege of the history teacher of the year, and it's weird seeing my face on flyers and whatnot. And I do owe it. I'm going to use my privilege because I'm not in Somerville anymore to have that throwback opportunity one last time. I know we're running out of time, but I would love to hear from one of my former students that's in line right now.
Oh, okay.
Because I forgot to attend his play. And it's great for me to say, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not in the area anymore, even though I literally work in the town next over. So I know we're pressing out of time, but I would love to be reminded about why I love what I do from a student that, held me accountable many times. Yes, sir.
All right.
No pressure, by the way. This is.
I learned a lot in your class, obviously, and I'm a student who believes that education is very important to all students, but I also believe that a lot of the times when students don't succeed, it's the fault of the administrators and of the school system, not necessarily the kids. And I think that you were very good at teaching the kids who were not necessarily academically successful all the time. I was wondering if you have any advice or any solution or something you would say to a student whose school system isn't necessarily listening to them and doesn't necessarily respect them or treat them equally, like relation like CP or honors students or AP or, segregated classrooms. And if you have a line that you would tell a student who feels like there's no hope because there is no hope, what you would tell them to try to get them to stay in school and to try to stay academically motivated.
No pressure.
Sorry.
It's like, I'm going to do what you say right now would determine if I'm in school tomorrow. I would say, even though I would be preaching to the choir, I would say that as a student, you learn differently than the person next to you. That you are a human just like the teacher that's in front of you. That they've had some type of schooling, that they were a kid in one time in their life. And I think it's important as a young person to figure out how to advocate for yourself. And it doesn't have to necessarily be you're going to start a movement. Advocating for yourself as simple as being able to write an email or talk to a teacher and letting them know what you may need in regards to just enjoying your time in the classroom, and not in a way where you need straight A's or you need to aim to go to a certain college. So that's one part of it. The other part is, I think for a student, having that faith that there's at least one educator, one adult in your building that loves, giving assessments and whatnot, but like being able to turn to one person who can support you, because they do exist. Like I know I'm a different teacher when I first started in 2012 to the teacher that I am now. So being able to find those educators and the same accountability that I will hold for educators, even myself, is being able to find a time to listen and put things in perspective that for the most part young people truly just want to be in a place where their voices are heard, that they want to learn something new. It may not happen throughout the 10 months that you have them. It could be that 1 5-minute exchange where they realize that, oh, that makes sense. So yeah, it's kind of like a two-way street. And again, I would encourage young people to not lose that hope because it exists. And one of the best ways not to lose that hope is to make sure that the adults who hear certain messages, such as the question that you asked, adults are able to reflect and support when a student comes to them and say, hey, not just hey, there's a question, but just hey. So again, putting a human connection to that is very helpful.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and thank you all of you.
Thank you, everyone. Well done. Thank you. Great job.
Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to stay and have some refreshments with us. Thank you so much for joining us on this rainy day.
Thank you.
Thank you all of you.
Thank you.